Hitler begins to essentially reorganize his party based on the type of shadow government that he is going to be building prior to coming to power. So essentially, he's going to build a secondary structure within the party that will almost mirror the actual state, so the German state. And so once he is elected to power, it's just a matter of him fusing the party system. You are looking at an illustration from a Nazi publication called Signal. This was a propaganda magazine, kind of similar to Life magazine. It was an illustrated magazine. It was published in multiple languages, including English, and so many of the English editions, there's bound sets of Signal magazine, and so you can kind of read in the original English that the Nazis used their propaganda, and here you can see an illustration of kind of this ideal, almost Sim City-like vision of Nazi Germany, the way the Nazis saw them. And you can see that it's divided essentially into these 5 circles, each circle becoming larger and encompassing a greater territory, with the Gau being the largest territory. And so we see, first of all, on the very first level, you have der Block, the block, just like a city block or a apartment complex. That would be the smallest party organizational unit. Next comes die Cell, the cell. That's a number of blocks put together. Then you have the Ortsgruppe, that could be described as the district or the neighborhood. Further up, you begin to get into der Kreis, which could be equivalent to a county, maybe, if you want to find a kind of North American equivalent. And then finally, the biggest, the overall, is der Gau, the Gau, which is equivalent to roughly a German state or province. And so when Hitler starts, there's 35 Gaus, but of course, once he comes to power, Hitler will seize Austria, and so there'll be Gaus, additional Gaus formed in Austria. Parts of Poland after 1939 will be incorporated into Germany. They too will become Gaus, and as well, of course, he's got foreign Germans, those living in the United States, those living in South America, and so forth. That becomes this kind of global Gau. So each Gau will have a Gau leader or a Gau leader. Leiter means leader in German. These are the most powerful members of the Nazi Party, the Gau leaders. Here you can see a map of Germany and roughly kind of the Gaus, Pomerania, East Prussia, Brandenburg, Silesia, Saxony, Bavaria, Baden, and so forth. All these will be Gaus. Big cities like Berlin, Nuremberg will make up a Gau of their own. And so eventually there will be 41 Gau leaders or governors, with the 41st Gau leader representing Germans who are living abroad. They are the elite of the Nazi Party, the governors. They will be very powerful. Each governor often will have, within kind of the parameters of Nazi ideology, may have his own policies in his own state. They're nicknamed the Golden Pheasants for the kind of brown and gold uniform they wear. You could see them to the left in that brown colored uniform. The individuals on the right in the field gray are members of the SS. You can recognize a Gauleiter as well from this very ornate gold colored with oak leaves armband that they wear. It's not an ordinary armband, it's a highly decorative armband. So 41 Gauleiters. Then you have 808 Kreis, and each one, of course, has its own Kreisleiters. So the Gauleiters supervise the Kreisleiters. You'll have 28,376 Ortsgruppenleiters, 89,378 Zellleiters, and finally 463,000 Blockleiters. So essentially, you have 651,000, 500,000 uniformed individuals representing the Nazi Party, starting from the Blockleiter. And so, you know, there would be a Blockleiter, for example, on a college campus. There'd be a Blockleiter in an apartment house. So if anybody needed to complain to the Nazi Party or denounce someone, they would immediately know who their Blockleiter is. And in the same way, the Nazi Blockleiter is very familiar with everybody living in their blocks. So you're beginning to get this kind of very tightly meshed supervision of German society. And of course, for the moment, these individuals are organized to bring the Nazi Party to power. And of course, once the Nazis take power, then these individuals immediately slip into this kind of parallel ruling class. Nazi Germany will be described, as we'll see later, as a dual state. There is a kind of government, the formal government, but then there is the Nazi Party, which has enormous power over the government and essentially uses the government, the ministries, as almost a rubber stamp. Sort of in the way that the Soviet Union, prior to the fall of communism, was organized. You know, you had these government agencies, government ministries, but the real power was the Communist Party. And essentially they used the government as a tool. Well, the same thing is going to happen in Nazi Germany as well. You can see that the party is, as I say, this hierarchy of uniformed individual. It's almost an army, and there are a lot of subsidiary ranks in between these principal 5 ranks that I had described. The individual on the right wearing the white uniform, that's a summer uniform. It's cooler in the summer, white colored uniform. So here you can see the rank symbols, just to give you a sense of the hierarchy. Here you're starting off with a Reichsleiter, Gauleiter, and then you begin to work your way down, you know, to Kreisleiters, Ortsgruppenleiters, Zellleiters, and so forth. It's as I say, it's a kind of a military structure with the ranks eventually going from the top, like general, the Gauleiter, or say Field Marshal, Gauleiter, all the way down to, corporal, down to private, ordinary Nazi, and the lowest rank, provisional Nazi. You would just get a blank insignia on your collar, and once you've kind of passed the probationary period, you become a ordinary Nazi, and then you work your way up the ranks. It's essentially the aristocracy of Nazi Germany, and essentially Nazi Germany will be ruled by Gauleiters and party members, and in the black you can see the SS. These are the two organizations that will find precedence in Nazi Germany. We'll see that the stormtroopers themselves, the street fighters, will fall by the wayside once Hitler takes power. In terms of the party membership, it is growing steadily. 1925, once Hitler comes out, 27 members. 1926, 35,000 members. 1927, 75,000. It's a very slow growth, roughly 25,000 members a year. 1928, 108,000. And 1929, we begin to see this rapid acceleration of Nazi Party membership. And, some of you with a little bit of a handle on history can guess why, but I'll get into it as we're going further into the lecture. But by 1929, you have 178, almost 200,000 party members. It almost doubles in 1929. And by then, you also have 100,000 uniformed thugs, the SA, the paramilitary. By 1932, the Nazi Party will have quadrupled in size to nearly 500,000 men, 400,000 SA men, 4 times the German army. Remember, the German army is restricted to only 100,000 men. And so this already by 1932 is alarming the German army as they find themselves, if they ever got into a conflict with the Nazi Party, being outnumbered 4-1 by the stormtroopers. And not that the German army is any more heavily armed than the stormtroopers would have been. Again, remember, the German army is prohibited from having tanks, heavy artillery, the Air Force. So the German army essentially is a very heavily armed force intended to just maintain internal order. So, they're outnumbered by 32 before the Nazis even take power, as I say, 4-1. Hitler also begins forming parallel to the Gauleiters. He begins forming as well the so-called party divisions. These are organizations like the Hitler Youth, the SS, the Motor Corps, the Labor Front, various paramilitary organizations, and each one will be headed by a Reichsleiter, a Reichsleader. So Himmler will carry a double title. He'll be Reichsleiter, and he will also be the Reichsführer of the SS. For now, the SS is buried inside the stormtroopers, the SA. Rome by now has been brought back to Germany to help discipline the SA, and Himmler is still nominally under the command of the SA, with the SS part of the SA, and that is partly going to lead to the doom of Rome, as Himmler essentially wants to break away from the SA and bring the SS, promoted to an independent organization within Nazi Germany, and he's going to do that at the expense of Rome. We have this notion that this kind of military-like hierarchy is kind of top-down. That's not really the case. The so-called Führerprinzip, or leader principle, is a complex one, and there is an example of what actually is meant by the Führer principle, or the leadership principle. A district leader writes Hitler asking to be reappointed to his position, and Hitler writes back. He says, it's not my duty to promote leaders. Promote yourself. The leader had written, he said, since I have the confidence of all the party membership in my district, I should be reappointed. And Hitler essentially writes back. He says, if you have the confidence of your party membership, then just be the leader. Don't wait for me to appoint you that. Go into power yourself. That's the Führer principle. It's a kind of a dog-eat-dog world where Hitler is going to want members of the party to compete with each other for power. And those that can please Hitler the best are the ones who are going to be advanced over others. Kind of almost like the Donald Trump presidency today. A number of multiple of people seem to have the same responsibility, and those that essentially that please the leader at that moment are the ones that are going to be advanced, and so that's what essentially Hitler's position is. He writes, you yourself say in your letter that almost all the members follow you, then why don't you take over the leadership of the branch? Simple as that. In terms of that party membership, even though it's called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, workers make up only about 30% of the Nazi Party membership. The left essentially attracts most of the German working class. It's the lower middle class, clerks, shopkeepers, minor government employees, farmers, that are drawn to the Nazi Party. So it's essentially a young people's party as well. The average age of a Nazi Party member is much younger than the average age of German. It's, as I say, a lower middle class party. However, the higher your social status in German society, the higher your rank in the Nazi Party. So in a strange way, even though the Nazi Party kind of challenges the traditional class system of Germany, it at the same time reflects it. So 40% of Gauleiters will come from upper middle class categories, upper middle class backgrounds. There'll be lawyers, there'll be prominent businessmen, and so forth. The average age, as I say, of a joiner in the Nazi Party in the 1920s was 29. By 1930, it just creeps up a year to the average age being 30. Um, so we're talking about essentially joiners. If, say, you're joining in the 1920s and you're 29, we're talking about people who were teenagers during the First World War. So the proportion of 18 to 29-year-olds in the Nazi party is higher than the proportion of 18 to 29-year-olds in Germany overall. In addition to the party divisions, Hitler also forms Nazi auxiliary organizations that again reflect German society. For example, there's a Nazi student league of university students. There's a Nazi Pupils League of primary school students and high school students. There's a Nazi Teachers League that reflects the National Teachers Union. There's, the way you have a medical association of doctors. There's the Nazi League of German Physicians. There's the Women's League. By the way, 5 to 6% of the Nazi Party membership are women. And so these various leagues, like the League of Nazi Lawyers, again, once the Nazi Party takes power, these leagues will become professional governing bodies. So, for example, the German Bar Association, which governed lawyers during the Weimar Republic, once the Nazis take power, is just going to be merged with the Nazi League of German Lawyers. So, as I say, Hitler is setting up this enormous apparatus that is going to be kind of shadowing the German state. And as the German state is going to start collapsing in the early 1930s, we're going to see that this kind of shadow government that Hitler builds, he's going to effortlessly slip it into power. So Hitler begins campaigning now for the next election, scheduled, I think, in 1928. And when it does occur in May of 1928, and this is the first time the Nazis run formally, you can see that the last election that members of the Nazi Party ran in, but under different party names, they got 14 seats out of 493. Not a very good showing. And Hitler, of course, was sitting in prison at that moment. 4 years later, the Nazis now run as the new Nazi Party, and they get 2 seats less. They get 12 seats out of 491 seats, hardly anything. So it's not boding very well for the Nazi Party. And so, again, once the Nazis in this 1928 election do so poorly, a lot of the Group Northwest socialist faction Nazis start once again agitating for the politics of catastrophe that the Strasser brothers are calling for. We've got to get out into the streets and fight for power, while Hitler keeps maintaining that the best route to power is going to be the electoral process. But he doesn't fare very well here in 1928. It's not at all looking good for Hitler. And Hitler is actually quite depressed at this point. He's considering maybe after this election retiring from politics. He's already quite wealthy just from the sales of Mein Kampf and from a cut in money he had taken from the party itself, from party membership dues. Hitler, after the 28 election, is leading more of a private life. He, as I say, is contemplating retiring. He's spending time on, his boat. He's dating his niece. They are having this torrid affair at that moment. She, of course, will find herself so stifled and repressed by her uncle, Hitler, that eventually she will shoot herself using Hitler's handgun in their apartment. She's found dead on Hitler's bed, with all sorts of theories that maybe Hitler had murdered her in a rage, although there is no evidence for that whatsoever. But Hitler is beginning to kind of retire now at the end of the 1920s into a private life. It's, like I say, he's not very optimistic about the future. There's a lot of reasons for this. Contrary to the myth that Hitler essentially is elected because of the financial crash in Germany of the 1920s, the hyperinflation, because of the humiliation of the Versailles Treaty and so forth. Indeed, those are elements, but by 1925, 1926, Germany is well on the path to recovery, partly with American money. There is this plan called the Dawes Plan that's launched in the United States as Germany, in hyperinflation, began defaulting on their reparation payments. The Americans began loaning money to Germany so that they can pay back the French and the British, so that the French and the British can pay back the Americans who had financed the French and British war effort during the First World War. The way it worked, of course, obviously it made no sense, if I owe you money and you owe money to someone else, and that someone else owes me money, why would I loan money to somebody, in a circle, the money coming back to me? The way it worked is Dawes Plan money was invested by American corporations into subsidiaries in Germany. Or into German companies where American companies or American investors would take an equity position. Those companies would then go to work. They start re-employing people. They're paying corporate tax. Employees are paying income tax. And that money is then used to pay back the reparation payments, the Dawes Plan. And so all these companies like Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Siemens, IG Farben, they're all going back into business and restructuring and emerging essentially as the kind of companies they still are today with that American money. So Germany is going back to work. And so by 1928, Germany is actually doing very well. It's quite prosperous. The metal foundries are back to work. The other thing you got to remember as well, since Germany is prohibited from having an air force and from a navy, they don't have to put all that money into building battleships or building military aircraft. All that is going into civilian technology, which sneakily the Weimar regime designs in such a way that they can be very quickly converted into military technology. But for the moment, all that money is being used to produce these high-speed ships. They're experimenting with civilian aircraft, again, that will be converted eventually to military aircraft. There's a lot of money available for infrastructure, the building of roads, the building of bridges. The schools are soundly financed. There's food and milk for all the students. There are all these new facilities at schools, new schools being built. Kids have microscopes in their classroom. Germany is beginning to boom. There's a renaissance in architecture. You have the Bauhaus, the design house, which is producing this new radical design style that's very modernistic. And you're looking at 1920s architecture in Germany, and so you have this whole radical school of new design, which Hitler, by the way, is not particularly pleased with. Again, reminding him of his days as a painter when he was kind of rejected by avant-garde artists. Germany is taking on this ultra-modern look by the 1920s. And there's also this here's one of the Bauhaus logos. There's also this kind of renaissance in culture, in art, in cinema. If you certainly study the history of film, the Germans are producing some very radical films at this moment, like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the first feature-length science fiction film, Metropolis, is produced in this era. There's a kind of booming consumer society now emerging, very much like in North America in the 1920s. In fact, this will be the richest period in Western civilization, the 1920s. We've never been, since the 1920s, as wealthy overall as a society in the way we were in the 20s. The kind of wealth that was built in that decade was unprecedented. So there's this kind of hedonistic society emerging. It's a highly sexualized society. It's very open. It's very kind of uncritical, decadent, one can say, a kind of a cabaret society, club society. Questions of race, gender are not of particular concern to Weimar era Germans. This is an era where you have, of course, all these transvestite clubs in Germany at that moment. Being gay is not particularly looked down upon in society at that moment. So it's becoming a very open society with a huge entertainment industry as well. Cinema, music, jazz. It certainly has no sense that all this is going to be heading towards what Nazi Germany is going to become. Have these huge dance clubs where the entire floor opens up and orchestra comes out of the floor. You have these kinds of singles bars where Every table has its own phone and a number of it over the table, and you see someone that strikes your fancy, you can phone their table and kind of chat them up on these phones. This is all, I guess, in an era before Tinder and Grindr and all those dating apps. Theater, you're looking at a theater stage, again, very much celebrating social issues, art as well. Again, as I say, Hitler is going to declare a lot of this kind of self-critical art as decadent art, and once he comes to power, he will be essentially persecuting this school of art. So, when we look at Germans of that era, and we see that there's a kind of exuberance in Germany at this moment. Anything is possible, literally spilling out into the streets. Nazism, anti-Semitism, as far as Germans are concerned, the majority of Germans, they think it's a joke. It's something that they make fun of on Halloween. Hitler essentially is asleep at the wheel, and it doesn't look like at that moment, after that 1928 election, that Hitler or his party, despite their growing membership, will have any kind of significance in the future of Germany. And of course, all that is going to change in an instant.